The night I heard something moving in the water beneath the platform, I knew I had made a mistake. I might not survive. Out here in the North Sea, storms aren't the only things that can kill you. The ocean itself has rules. Rules you either respect or you disappear, like those before you. There are 11 of them in total, written down in a notebook that changes hands every time someone new arrives. I remember the first time I broke one, how quickly everything spiraled out of control, and how I learned too late that the rules weren't superstition. Tonight the wind is rising again, and I can already feel something waiting below. The platform groaned as I climbed the slick steel stairs toward the sensor room, the sea hammering the legs far below like a warning. The sun was lowering fast, clouds pulling across it in bruised colors, and I could already feel the air shift the way it always did before a storm. I whispered the words to myself as a reminder, because I knew what happened to those who ignored them. Rule 1: always check the seawater sensors before sunset. No exceptions. Lars trailed behind me with his usual smirk, pretending he wasn't nervous, but even he couldn't hide the way his eyes kept darting toward the horizon. Inside the sensor room, the air was colder than it should have been, carrying the faint metallic tang of seawater that had no business being that high above deck. Rows of panels lined the wall, their blinking lights the only warmth in the dim space. I ran my hand across the control board and felt a thin layer of condensation, as though the storm had already seeped its fingers inside. Lars leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, shaking his head. "You really believe this ritual saves us?" he asked. His voice carried a half-hearted mockery, but his eyes betrayed unease. I didn't answer him immediately. Instead, I bent close to the main pressure gauge, watching the trembling needle. The hum of the machinery was steady, but there was something about the air that made my skin crawl. Memories pressed at the edges of my thoughts. The night a junior crewman skipped the inspection, choosing sleep over procedure. By the time we realized, water had been surging up through the lower compartments, alarms wailing, bulkheads groaning under the strain. We barely contained it, and the boy didn't last long after the shame of what he'd caused. The sea doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither do the rules. I moved to the second sensor panel, wiping away a smear of condensation with my glove. The numbers flickered slightly, just enough to make my stomach tighten. "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing. Lars squinted but shrugged. "It's nothing. These machines glitch all the time." His casual dismissal made my teeth clench. Out here every flicker mattered. Every hesitation, every oversight, those were the cracks the sea waited for, the cracks it slipped through. I adjusted the calibration and held my breath until the numbers steadied. Relief came slowly, like a tight fist unclenching, but it was temporary. The storm outside slammed into the platform again, making the whole structure shiver. I had to steady myself against the wall, the sound of crashing waves echoing up through the steel. The ocean was relentless, but tonight it felt different, too precise, too deliberate, as if the waves themselves were testing us. I checked the next row of sensors, my fingers trembling despite the gloves. Each reading was like a pulse, a heartbeat I had to keep alive. Lars stayed silent now, but I could feel his eyes on me, his doubt waning with every flicker of unease across his face. When I reached the final sensor, the sky outside had turned almost black, clouds smothering the last light of day. My breath fogged in the chill as I bent close, eyes narrowing at the faint hum of the machine. The reading was normal, steady, perfect, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was a sensation I had come to know well, the kind that slithered up your spine and whispered that danger was closer than the numbers would ever admit. I glanced back at Lars, his silhouette framed in the dim glow. "If these fail," I said, "you won't live long enough to laugh at me." He didn't laugh. For the first time he looked away from me, out the small window at the raging dark beyond. The platform shuddered again, a long groan that rattled the glass. I pressed my hand flat against the final panel, almost as though I could feel the truth through the machine itself. The numbers stayed steady, but the memory of that boy's mistake echoed in my mind. the alarms, the rushing water, the panic. It was never just about the readings, it was about respect. The sea demanded it, and the rules were the only language it understood. We stayed in that room longer than necessary, both of us listening to the storm like it carried a message. The lights from the panels painted our faces in cold shades of green and red, shifting with every blink. Lars finally muttered, "Maybe it isn't such a stupid rule after all." His voice was low, almost as though he was afraid the sea might hear him. I didn't reply. My gaze was fixed on the horizon, where lightning lit up the clouds for a split second, revealing waves higher than I'd ever seen before. My gut told me the sensors hadn't revealed everything. When I finally stepped out onto the walkway, the wind hit me like a wall, icy and brutal. Spray from the waves lashed against my face, and I pulled my hood tight, gripping the rail as the platform swayed. The storm wasn't letting up, it was just beginning. I walked slowly, Lars following a few steps behind, both of us silent now. Every groan of the steel, every shudder beneath my boots reminded me that out here, on this isolated platform in the middle of nowhere, the rules weren't suggestions, they were survival. Tonight had proven it once again, though something told me it was only the beginning. The sea below was black and endless, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in the water that didn't belong to the waves. My heart pounded, my grip on the rail tightening until my knuckles ached. I blinked, and the shape was gone, swallowed by the storm. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was something the sensors could never warn us about. Either way, I knew that following the rules was the only thread keeping us tethered to life out here. And as the platform shuddered again beneath the assault of the sea, I couldn't help but wonder, what happens the night even the rules aren't enough? That night, long after I had finished the sensor checks, I lay in my bunk, listening to the storm tear across the platform. The metal walls groaned with every strike of wind, rattling bolts and pipes, until the whole structure seemed alive. I told myself it was normal, just the usual fight between storm and steel, but I couldn't silence the unease coiling in my gut. The memory of that dark shape moving in the waves haunted me. And worse, midnight was approaching. That was when Rule 2, never step onto the lower deck after midnight. No matter what you hear pressed hardest on my mind. I had mocked this one once. Years ago, before I understood why it mattered. Midnight had come, and I had heard the sounds. A voice calling, weak and desperate, carried on the wind. It sounded like someone drowning, someone begging for help. Against my better judgment, I went down the ladder to the lower deck, flashlight trembling in my grip. What I saw wasn't a man, but the outline of something half risen from the water, a shape too tall, too thin, swaying in the storm's rhythm. I had stumbled back up the ladder in blind panic, never daring to look directly at its face. I didn't laugh at the rule again after that. Tonight the storm made the platform shudder like a living thing. And sure enough, as the clock inched past midnight, the sounds began. At first it was only the wind, but slowly it changed. A voice faint but distinct, calling from below. "Help, please." The sound carried through the pipes, vibrating in the metal. Lars stirred in the bunk, across from mine, his eyes wide in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I didn't want to answer, but the truth pressed itself out of me. "Yes, and you're not going down there." The cries grew louder, more insistent, echoing up through the grated floors as though the sea itself was speaking. Lars sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, his face pale but curious. "What if it's real? What if someone's trapped down there?" he said. I grabbed his wrist before he could stand. "Don't even think about it," I hissed. He tried to pull free, but my grip held. "It sounds like a person," he insisted. "I can't just—" I cut him off. "You don't know what's waiting down there." "I do." The look I gave him must have been convincing, because his defiance faltered. The platform groaned again, water spraying against the windows as the storm raged. The voice shifted, no longer weak and desperate, but angry, demanding. "Come down now," it hissed, and for a moment I thought I could hear more than one. My heart pounded in my chest, my throat dry as I forced myself to stay still. Lars was shaking his head, torn between instinct and reason. "That doesn't sound human," he muttered. Finally, he looked at me, waiting for an explanation, but I didn't give one. Some truths weren't meant to be spoken aloud, not when the sea was listening. The hours crawled by, each minute stretched thin by the storm and the voices that refused to quiet. I pressed a pillow over my ears, but the sound still seeped through, vibrating in my bones. They called my name once. I know they did. Hearing your own name whispered from below, dragged out in that wet, broken tone, is something you never forget. Lars lay rigid in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. We didn't speak again, not until the first pale light of dawn finally cut through the storm. When morning came, the sea looked deceptively calm, sunlight glinting off the waves as though nothing had happened. I stepped onto the upper deck, the air sharp and cold. Scanning the lower levels, everything looked normal. No damage, no flooding, no evidence of the voices. But I knew better. The sea had a way of disguising its hunger, waiting until nightfall to reveal its teeth again. Lars joined me, his face pale in the morning light. "What was that?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Something you don't want to see up close." That was the closest thing to an answer I could give. The rest of the day passed in tense silence, both of us doing our work without the usual small talk. The memory of the voices lingered, clinging to us like salt in the air. I checked the sensors again compulsively, every flicker of light a reminder that survival was a fragile balance. But no matter how I tried to focus, I knew night would come again, and with it, the temptation to disobey the second rule. Every new hire on the platform thought they were strong enough to resist the voices. Every one of them learned the truth eventually, though some never got the chance to regret it. That night, I lay awake before the voices even started, the anticipation worse than the sound itself. My ears strained in the silence, waiting for the first whisper. When it came, my blood ran cold. It was Lars's voice this time. "Please help me," it cried, exactly in his tone, exactly in his rhythm. But Lars was right beside me, asleep in his bunk. I sat up, staring at his still chest, rising and falling with each breath. The sound from below grew louder, mimicking his voice perfectly, pleading again. I wanted to shake him awake, but something in me froze. If he heard it, he might go. I stayed rigid in the darkness, gripping the edge of my mattress until my fingers ached. The voice shifted again, breaking apart into something wetter, heavier, no longer quite human. My own name followed, dragged out into a sound that made bile rise in my throat. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to close my eyes, whispering silently that dawn was only hours away. But deep down, I knew that one night, someone would break, and the sea would win again. Rules existed because temptation always came disguised as truth, and some doors, like the lower deck after midnight, were never meant to be opened. The night after the voices had imitated Lars, I barely slept. My body begged for rest, but my mind wouldn't surrender. The sea has ways of crawling under your skin, ways of convincing you that silence itself is dangerous. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard echoes of my own name spilling up through the grates of the platform, wet and broken. By the time dawn came, I felt like a ghost wandering the steel hallways, caught in the space between exhaustion and paranoia. That was when I remembered Rule 3. If the foghorn sounds when the sea is calm, do not answer it. It seems harmless, doesn't it? A foghorn is supposed to sound during storms, when visibility drops to nothing, when ships need warnings to avoid colliding with steel and concrete. But here the foghorn had its own rules. It would blare sometimes on clear, glassy mornings, when the horizon stretched unbroken in every direction, not a cloud in sight. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a malfunction. I climbed up to the control room to silence the alarm, only to find the switch untouched. the machinery perfectly fine. The sound had come from somewhere else, somewhere older. That day the sea lay flat as a mirror. The sun glared so hard against the water it made my eyes ache, but still from the east came the long, low bellow of the foghorn. It rolled across the waves, vibrating in the platform beneath my boots, shaking the air in my lungs. Lars froze mid-step, dropping the wrench in his hand, his face drained of color. He didn't ask me what it was. He already knew. Everyone did. The sound came again. Longer this time, deeper, like something buried miles below the water was waking. Lars whispered, "That's not the rig's horn." His voice cracked as he said it, and the fear in his tone twisted my stomach. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." The platform seemed to hold its breath after that. The gulls vanished. The usual chatter of waves against the supports fell into silence. The ocean was too still, too deliberate, as if waiting for us to respond. That was the danger. Answering. Most newcomers didn't understand what that meant. Answering could be as simple as calling out, as raising a hand, as acknowledging the sound at all. The foghorn wasn't a signal for ships. It was a lure, waiting for recognition. Lars shifted nervously, running a hand through his hair. "What if it's—" He stopped himself, but I knew what he was about to say. "A ship, survivors, help." The same excuses every skeptic clung to. "It's not," I cut in sharply, perhaps too harshly, but I had to. I couldn't let curiosity plant its hook in him. "Then what is it?" he demanded, his voice too loud against the silence. I looked out across the water, the horizon shimmering under the weight of the sun. "Something that wants us to listen," I said. "And you don't ever want it to know you're listening." The horn sounded again, closer now, though no vessel broke the surface. The vibration crawled up my spine, settling into my teeth, my skull. My vision wavered, as if the sunlight itself bent with the sound. I forced myself to stay still, my lips pressed tight. Beside me, Lars trembled, his fists clenching at his sides. It's easy to say you'll ignore something, but when the air itself feels like it's begging for acknowledgement, silence becomes unbearable. We stayed frozen like that for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the horn faded, rolling back out to sea, each blast softer farther away. When the last echo finally vanished, the normal sounds returned all at once. Waves slapping against the rig, gulls shrieking overhead, the platform's steel skeleton creaking with heat. Lars let out a shaky breath, collapsing against the rail. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I wanted to tell him the truth, but the truth was too heavy, too tangled with memories I'd spent years trying to bury. So instead I said, "That was the sea asking you to answer. You didn't. That's all that matters." But the truth pressed at me anyway. Years ago, before I learned the rules, another worker had answered. His name was Keenan, a brash young man who believed rules were for cowards. The foghorn had sounded on a day just like this. Clear sky, calm water, and Keenan had laughed, waving out at the horizon as if mocking the sea. "I hear you," he shouted. His voice rang across the platform, bold, stupid. We all froze, horror rooting us to the spot. For a moment nothing happened. Then the water erupted. Something massive struck the supports from below, shaking the platform so hard pipes burst and alarms wailed. We scrambled, clutching at railings as steel screamed under the assault. Keenan stumbled, too close to the edge. A shape rose from the water, slick, immense, shadowed by sunlight, and an arm, if you could call it that, reached for him. It was longer than any human limb, ending in fingers that weren't fingers at all but strands, tendrils of flesh. They wrapped around his waist, dragging him screaming into the waves. He didn't surface again. The sea calmed seconds later, leaving nothing but silence. That was the day I carved the rule into my mind. Lars didn't know that story, not yet, but as I looked at him, trembling against the rail, I realized one day he might have to. One day, The sea would tempt him directly, and my warnings wouldn't be enough. The rules protected us only if we believed in them fully. Half belief was as good as an invitation. That night, as the platform settled into uneasy quiet, I dreamed of the foghorn. Its call bled into my sleep, deep and resonant, pulling me toward the rail. In the dream, I stood at the edge of the deck, the sea calm and black, waiting. The horn sounded again, and against my will, my mouth opened. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't mine, it was theirs. I woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. Across the room, Lars stirred in his bunk, muttering in his sleep. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I didn't dare wake him. Some dreams weren't meant to be interrupted. Some rules followed you even when you slept. The morning after the dream, I woke to find Lars already on deck, staring up at the central tower. The tower is the highest point on the rig, a spindly column of rust and steel, stretching toward the sky like a broken finger. From the top you can see everything, the endless horizon, the shifting colors of the sea, even shadows beneath the water when the sun strikes right. But the tower is not safe. I reminded myself of that as I stepped out into the gray light, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and remembered Rule 4, never climb the tower after midnight. No matter what you hear, the rule seemed ridiculous when I first heard it. Superstitious nonsense, I thought, a way to keep workers from sneaking cigarettes at odd hours, or falling to their deaths in the dark. But that was before I understood how the sea used the tower. Before I heard the voices. Lars turned as I approached, his eyes hollow, bruises smudged beneath them. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, his gaze drifting back to the steel column. The wind was gentle that morning, almost too gentle. It carried a strange stillness, as if the world were holding something back. I joined him at the railing, uneasy. "You dreamed it too," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. He blinked at me, startled. Then he nodded once. His lips trembled like he wanted to tell me more, but fear pressed the words down. "The horn," he whispered at last. "It called me, told me to go up there." My chest tightened. That was how it started. Always the same pattern. The foghorn in their sleep, the whisper of the sea calling them higher, closer. The tower became a beacon for that hunger, a ladder to something waiting above. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Steady. You didn't go." "No," he said, shaking his head too quickly. "No, of course not." I woke up before I could. He cut himself off, biting down on his lip, but I saw it in his eyes. He had wanted to, badly. The memory of the first time I broke Rule 4 came back sharp, uninvited. It was years ago, when I was still green, when I thought warnings were meant to be tested. Midnight had come, and with it, a sound that wasn't supposed to exist. Not the foghorn this time. Laughter, children's laughter, drifting up the stairwell of the tower. It was light and sweet, out of place against the black ocean night. I knew there were no children on the rig. I knew that, and still, I climbed. The steel steps groaned beneath me as I ascended, the laughter growing louder, echoing through the hollow frame. My hands shook as I gripped the railing, the night wind slicing cold against my skin. Halfway up, I saw them, shapes darting between the beams above, quick and playful, as if a group of kids were playing tag in the dark. But their limbs bent wrong. Too many joints, too many fingers. When the moonlight caught them, I saw their faces, and they weren't faces at all, just smooth skin stretching over bone. I froze, terror rooting me in place. That was when the laughter changed. It wasn't sweet anymore. It was hungry. The shadows surged toward me, shrieking with joy. I ran, stumbling back down the stairs, nearly breaking my neck in my panic. I didn't stop until I slammed the tower door shut behind me, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't sleep for days after. That was the night. Rule 4 etched itself into me like a scar. Never climb the tower after midnight, no matter what you hear. I looked at Lars now, and saw the same restless pull gnawing at him. It's going to keep calling, I warned him. Not just in dreams. One night you'll hear voices up there. Voices you'll swear you recognize. And that's when it's strongest. That's when you can't listen. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. What happens if someone does? I wanted to lie, to tell him they just see shadows, scare themselves, come back shaken but alive. But lies don't keep anyone safe here. So I told him the truth. There was a man before you, I said. Name was Grayson. He heard his wife one night. She'd been dead for years, but her voice came from the top of the tower, clear as if she were waiting for him. He didn't even hesitate, climbed the whole way. We tried to stop him, but my throat tightened. We found him at dawn, or parts of him. What was left was scattered across the deck, like the sea spit him back out in pieces. And the pieces didn't look human anymore. Lars turned pale, gripping the rail until his knuckles whitened. He didn't ask another question. That night, I fought to stay awake. The sea has a way of breaking your resolve, slipping into your mind when you're weakest. Midnight came, the wind died, the platform creaked, and the air carried a faint whisper. I stiffened, every nerve in my body screaming to ignore it, but the whisper grew louder, clearer, until I recognized it. My father's voice. He drowned when I was 12. I never found the body. Hearing him now, calling from the tower, shattered something in me. Son, he said. Just that, one word, dripping with warmth, with longing. The urge to climb nearly broke me. My legs twitched, my chest heaved. Every part of me screamed to go to him, to see him again, even if it wasn't real. Especially if it wasn't real. But I remembered Grayson. I remembered the laughter. I pressed my palms to my ears, rocking in the darkness, until the voice faded with the tide. When it was gone, I wept like a child, shaking in the cold night air. Across the bunk room, Lars tossed in his sleep. His lips moved again, murmuring words I couldn't hear. His hand twitched, reaching toward the ceiling, as though climbing in his dreams. And I knew then the tower would come for him too. The ocean has moods. Some you can read at a glance. The steady roll of calm seas, the jagged fury of storms. Others hide deeper, shifts you only sense in your gut, like the way the air stills before lightning, or how gulls vanish before a squall. But nothing prepares you for the nights the water changes. Not in color alone, in intent. That's when you remember Rule 5. If the water below the rig turns red, lock every door and do not look over the rail. It was Lars who saw it first. We were finishing the midnight rounds, the deck lamps burning in their usual pale circles. The night was black as tar, the moon hidden, the stars swallowed. Only the sound of the waves and the creak of steel kept us company. Lars lagged behind me, dragging his boots, like he was carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless hours. Stop, he whispered suddenly. I turned, irritated, until I saw the expression on his face. Rigid, transfixed, the blood drained out of him. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring over the side. The sea below the rig had gone dark crimson, as if blood had spilled across its surface and spread in every direction. Not the natural red of algae bloom, not the rusty tint of silt. This was thicker, blacker in the center, shading outward like something alive was pulsing beneath it, and it was moving. Slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. My throat went dry. Don't look, I hissed. But it was already too late. The rules exist because the sea doesn't just move around us, it notices us. When the water turns red, it means we've been marked. If you keep watching, it watches back. I grabbed Lars by the collar and yanked him inside the steel door of the main corridor, slamming it shut so hard the echo rattled through the rig. I spun the wheel lock, forcing it into place. My hands shook as I dragged him away from the porthole, but he kept twisting, trying to look back. What was that? He gasped. His eyes were too wide, pupils dilated like prey cornered by a predator. Don't say it. Don't even think about it, I snapped. I pressed him against the wall, my face inches from his. When the sea goes red, it's hunting. You feed it with attention. Staring gives it permission. That's how it gets inside. Lars swallowed, his throat working like he wanted to argue, but fear stole the words from him. I shoved him toward the bunk room. Every door, every hatch, lock them tight. And whatever you do, don't look out again. The rig groaned, the steel vibrating, like something massive had brushed against the pillars below. I felt it through the soles of my boots, a deep tremor that made my teeth chatter. The air smelled of iron, sharp and choking, like fresh blood. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, but weaker, dimmer. That night dragged on longer than any before. The sound of the sea changed, turning into a sloshing, sucking rhythm, like waves pulling at meat instead of stone. We huddled inside the locked bunk room, listening to the creaks of metal and the dull thumps against the hull. Once I swore I heard a hand, human deliberate, slap against the porthole glass. Lars sat on the edge of his cot, rocking slightly, whispering to himself, "It's just fish, just fish." But we both knew better. Around 3 in the morning, something pressed against the door. The metal bowed inward, with a low groan, as if tested by a giant weight. Then came a sound that froze my marrow, a voice, a woman's, muffled but clear, singing, not words I recognized, not a language I knew, but a lullaby all the same, gentle, soothing, tempting. Lars stood, his face went slack, as though the song had hooked into him. He stepped toward the door, his hand reaching for the lock. "Sit down," I barked, shoving him back with more force than I intended. His head cracked against the steel wall, and he blinked rapidly, coming back to himself with a sharp breath. "You open that door, you're gone," I warned. "It won't even leave a body." He nodded shakily, clutching the side of his head, his eyes filled with tears. "Why us?" he whispered. "Because we stayed. Because the rig is a beacon, and the ocean never forgives a trespass." But I didn't tell him that. Sometimes the truth kills faster than lies. By dawn, the singing stopped. The groans faded. And when I finally risked peeking through the slit of the steel shutter, the water was blue again, calm and endless, as if the night had been nothing but a fever dream. But I knew better. I've seen the red come 3 times in all my years here. Each time someone new. Each time, it takes more from us. The first time, we lost Jackson. He hadn't believed the rule, thought he could outstare the sea. They found him the next morning, sprawled on the deck, eyes burned black, lungs filled with salt water, though he hadn't gone overboard. His face was twisted into something unrecognizable, like the sea had worn him as a mask, and then discarded him. The second time, it was calder. He didn't look, but he listened. Said the voices whispered secrets in the waves, promised him freedom from this place. One night, he unlocked the main hatch and walked into the dark without hesitation. We heard his footsteps on the deck, steady, confident, until they stopped. By the time we searched, he was gone. Only his boots remained at the rail. Now Lars was marked. I saw it in his eyes when the lullaby ended, how a part of him still longed to hear it again. The sea never forgets a listener. That morning, as the sun bled weak light across the horizon, I checked the seawater sensors, made the report, and told myself we had survived another night. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, because I knew the truth. We hadn't survived. Not really. We had only delayed the price, and the sea always collects. Names are anchors. They tether us, remind us who we are, keep us grounded when the sea wants to drag us under. That's why this rule terrifies me, more than any of the others, because out here, the ocean learns your name. It whispers it back to you, in voices that shouldn't exist. And if you answer, even with a glance, you're lost. That's the warning carved into steel above the comm room, the one I've traced with my fingers countless nights, just to remind myself of who I am. Rule 6. Never respond when someone calls your name from the water. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. It was the tail end of my second month on the rig. Exhaustion had set into my bones. My eyelids felt weighted by lead, my thoughts thick and sluggish. I stumbled out onto the deck to check the turbine valves, leaning heavily against the railing for balance. That's when I heard it. Daniel. My name. Soft, perfectly clear, floating up from the black swells below like a lover's whisper. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice had been low, melodic, and unmistakably familiar. My mother's, but she'd been dead for 5 years. I gripped the railing until the rust bit into my palms. My first instinct was to look over, to see if some crew member was messing with me, but the water below churned empty and endless, just waves slapping metal, just darkness breathing. Then it came again. Daniel, please, help me. I staggered backward, shaking my head violently. My lungs burned like I'd been holding my breath. That was the moment the rules snapped into focus. I remembered the old foreman's gravel voice drilling them into us. Our first night. Don't answer. Don't even acknowledge it. The sea knows once you hear it. Ignore it, or it will claim you. So I stumbled inside, slamming the hatch behind me. I sat in the corridor for hours, back against cold steel, trying not to cry, because part of me still wanted to run back out, to listen closer, to believe my mother was waiting in the water. The sea knows our weaknesses. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. First my mother, then my father, gone a decade. Then a voice I didn't recognize, but somehow trusted, warm and kind, always asking me to look, always begging me to answer. By morning, my throat was raw from whispering. No, the others have their own stories. Lars admitted, during one of his rare moments of honesty, that he'd heard his younger brother calling one night, a brother who'd drowned as a child. Lars said he'd almost answered. His hand was on the hatch. When he remembered Rule 6, he stayed inside, but the guilt never left him. He still wakes up screaming sometimes, swearing he can hear his brother pounding on the walls of the rig. Then there was Vance, a big man, all muscle and bravado, the type who laughed at the rules and mocked anyone who clung to them, until the night he didn't come back from his shift. We found the deck hatch swinging open, the padlock broken clean through. No sign of struggle, no blood, just the faint echo of his name rolling over the waves. When the wind shifted, Vance had answered, and the sea had swallowed him whole. After that, no one laughed at the rules again. But knowing the rule doesn't make it easier. If anything, it makes the voices sharper, more insistent. They don't just mimic, they learn. They remember what shakes you, what breaks you. Last week it called me again. The night was calm, eerily calm, the water flat as glass. I was on the observation deck alone, logging wind speeds. Then I heard it, Daniel. Only this time, it wasn't my mother, it was Emma, my sister. She's alive, back on land, raising 2 kids. I talk to her on the radio every Sunday. She's real, she's safe. But when the sea called, it wasn't just her voice, it was her crying. Daniel, it's me, please. I don't know how I got here. I'm drowning, help me. The desperation in her tone gutted me. My legs moved on their own, carrying me 3 steps toward the rail before I caught myself. I clamped my hands over my ears, screaming into the night. You're not her, you're not her, the voice laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but softly, as if amused at how easy it was to crack me. Then silence. For the rest of the night, the rig felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Every creak of metal sounded like footsteps approaching. Every drip of condensation sounded like whispers. By dawn, I'd nearly bitten through my own tongue, just to stay silent. The sea never forgets a name, once it's spoken. That's the part no one tells you. It lingers, stalks you. You can ignore it once, twice, maybe a dozen times, but eventually, it will wear you down. And the moment you slip, the moment you whisper back, you're gone. The old-timers say, that's how the rig keeps running. It feeds the ocean one name at a time. The sea takes, the rig remains, and the rest of us survive another day. But I don't know how much longer I can last. My name feels heavy on my tongue, too heavy, like the ocean already has it gripped in its teeth. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind dies and the sea lies flat, I swear I can hear every voice at once. My family, my friends, even the ones I've lost. They don't sound like echoes anymore. They sound close, right below the surface, waiting for me to answer. And God help me, sometimes I want to. The ballast chambers sit beneath everything else. Deeper than the bunks, deeper than the storage decks, deeper even than the turbine guts. They're the steel stomach of the rig, where seawater is pumped in and out to balance us against the tides. Most of the time, the place is nothing but echoing pipes, dripping condensation, and the constant slosh of the ocean moving in its iron cage. But if there's one place that feels wrong, truly wrong, it's down there. And that's why the rule is carved into the hatch in letters an inch deep. Rule 7. Never descend into the lower ballast chambers after midnight. The first week I was here, I didn't understand why. Midnight is just a number, right? You could argue dawn, dusk, tide shift. Those make sense. But midnight? That's a superstition's hour, a thing from old stories. I chalked it up to crew paranoia, until the night I had to take readings past curfew. The foreman had been coughing up blood, and we were 2 men down. That left me covering extra duties, and the ballast valves needed inspection before morning. I remember checking my watch as I climbed the narrow ladder downward. It read 12:03, just past midnight. I hesitated, thought about turning back, but exhaustion and pride pushed me forward. Rules or no rules, the job needed doing. The moment my boots hit the steel grating, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was different, thicker, colder, heavy with salt, and something metallic, like rust ground into powder. My flashlight beam caught droplets running along the pipes, but they weren't dripping right. They slid upward, against gravity, racing toward the ceiling like veins searching for a heart. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced I was seeing things. But when I looked again, the water was still crawling where it shouldn't. Then I heard it, not voices this time, not like Rule 6. This was something deeper, a pulse, slow, deliberate, like the rig itself had grown a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat reverberated through the walls, rattling bolts, shaking dust down from the steel ribs overhead. My chest clenched in sync, like my body was being forced to match its rhythm. I forced myself down the catwalk, trying to ignore the sensation of being watched. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner breathing. I reached the valve station, flipped open the clipboard, and that's when the lights failed. Pitch black swallowed everything. My flashlight flickered once, then died with a crackle. I stood frozen, choking on air that suddenly felt damp and alive, as if the chamber itself were inhaling me. The thumping grew louder, faster, until it wasn't a heartbeat anymore, but a pounding drum, shaking the chamber like something enormous was trying to break free. And then something moved in the water below. I couldn't see it, but I heard it. The churn of liquid, the slap of waves against iron, the sound of something rising where there should only be pumps and sealed tanks. I backed away slowly, hands fumbling along the railing. That's when I felt the grating shift beneath me. It buckled, dipped, like something huge was pressing upward from the depths. I ran. I don't remember climbing the ladder. I don't remember slamming the hatch shut so hard the hinges screamed. I only remember collapsing in the corridor, drenched in sweat, gasping like I'd barely escaped drowning. When I checked the clipboard later, the readings were already filled in, not by me. Scrawled handwriting I didn't recognize, smeared with salt water. The others don't talk much about what lives in the ballast chambers, but their silence says enough. I've noticed none of the older crew will even walk past the hatch after midnight. They take the long way around, through 3 extra ladders, just to avoid it. Lars once muttered something drunk about the thing in the water wanting to breathe. Another man swore he saw a hand slip through the grating once, pale and webbed, reaching before vanishing back below. I thought maybe they were exaggerating, until the night Carter broke the rule. He was a new hire, cocky, loud-mouthed, like Vance before the sea silenced him. Carter claimed he didn't believe in ghost stories or rules written in rust. So one night, just past midnight, he marched down the ladder with a crowbar, announcing he'd prove us all idiots. We waited, minutes ticked by, then came the screaming. Not the kind of scream you let out when you're hurt, not even when you're terrified. This was primal, raw, a sound that belonged in caves 1,000 years ago. We rushed to the hatch, but by the time we got there, the noise had cut off. Silence swallowed everything. We unsealed the hatch, just enough to shine a light down. The chamber was quiet, empty, only the sound of water sloshing lazily against metal. The catwalk was wet, but no sign of Carter. The only thing left was his crowbar, bent into a perfect curve, dripping with something too thick to be water. Since then, no one questions Rule 7. But here's the worst part, the part I've never told anyone. 2 nights ago, I woke from a dead sleep to a sound echoing through the pipes. A voice. Not from outside, like Rule 6, but from below. A gurgling whisper, bubbling through steel and salt. It called my name, not clear like the sea's mimicry, but garbled, wet, as if spoken through lungs filled with brine. And with it came the heartbeat. Slow, patient, waiting. I lay in my bunk, paralyzed, feeling the rhythm through the floor. I knew then that whatever lives in the ballast chambers isn't confined there. It reaches. It waits. And maybe one day, when enough rules are broken, it won't need the chambers at all. It will rise. Until then, the hatch stays sealed, and I pray the bolts hold. The foghorn is supposed to be a safety measure, a warning to passing vessels. Nothing more. Its deep, mournful bellow cuts across the sea, telling others that there's steel here in the mist, that they'd better steer clear or crash themselves into the bones of the rig. That's what I thought anyway. Until the night I learned it was part of the rules. Most nights it blares once, a steady moan, predictable and harmless. Sometimes it sounds twice, the tone stretching into the night like the voice of something old and tired. But the rule isn't about 1 call, or even 2. It's about 3. Rule 8. If the foghorn sounds 3 times in a row, no one opens the outer deck doors until sunrise. I didn't understand why 3 mattered until I was on shift during a storm. The rain came sideways, hard enough to sting the skin, and the wind pitched the whole platform like a toy in the hands of a furious child. We'd sealed every hatch and bolted every door, the whole place rattling as if it might tear free and drift into the abyss. I was stationed near the communications room, checking the emergency backups, when the first horn sounded. It rattled the windows, the walls, the bones in my chest. A pause, then the second blast. I frowned, leaning over the console. There weren't supposed to be any nearby vessels that night. Nothing but black water in every direction. The log confirmed it, no ships within miles, and yet the foghorn wailed again, a 3rd time, stretching into a sound that didn't feel mechanical anymore. The steel vibrated under my palms, too warm, like the horn wasn't just blowing, it was breathing. I heard shouting from the stairwell. Carter would have been down there if he hadn't been taken by Rule 7. Instead, it was Lars and 2 others, pounding up the steps, soaked to the bone. Their eyes were wide, their mouths pale slits. "Don't open the doors," Lars bellowed, slamming the control panel shut. His hands shook, knuckles white, as if sealing the rig against something I couldn't yet see. "What the hell's going on?" I asked. But the storm swallowed my words. Then I heard it, between the gusts of wind and the crashing waves. A sound lingered, low at first, then rising, threading through the storm like a voice. It wasn't the howl of air through steel, nor the groan of stressed iron. It was melodic, almost human. A song, something was singing out there in the storm. At first it was haunting, even beautiful, but then I caught the words. Not English, not any language I knew. But the longer it droned, the more I understood, as though the meaning pressed straight into my skull. It was calling us, beckoning, promising warmth, rest, an end to the cold ache of the sea. The new guy, Daniels, broke first. He was barely 20, still soft with youth, and the ocean hadn't yet carved its lessons into him. He bolted for the deck controls, muttering that there was someone out there, someone drowning, calling for help. Before Lars or I could stop him, he slammed the lever. The outer door clanged open. The storm roared in, drenching everything. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the blinding sheets of rain, something stood just beyond the threshold. Not a person. Not entirely. It had the shape of a woman, hair streaming in the gale, eyes dark hollows that reflected no light. Her skin shimmered slick like scales beneath the lightning, and her mouth twisted into a smile far too wide, sharp with teeth that glinted like broken glass. She didn't step inside. She didn't need to. Daniels rushed forward, as if strings pulled him, stumbling into the storm like a moth into flame. The figure's arms opened, and in an instant he was gone, swallowed by the night. The door slammed itself shut, with a force that knocked me off my feet, sealing with a finality I didn't dare question. The horn was silent again. The rest of the night dragged by in shivering silence. No one spoke. No one moved near the doors. I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, but all I could think about was how the foghorn had warned us. 3 blasts. Not 2, not 4, 3. By dawn, Daniels was a memory. The storm had passed, leaving the sea glass smooth, too calm for what had happened. I leaned over the railing, scanning the horizon, hoping to glimpse a body or debris. Instead, I saw something else. Shapes. Not ships, not waves. Figures moving just beneath the surface, circling the rig like sharks waiting for the right moment. Pale faces stared upward, eyes blank, mouths open in eternal song, and when the sunlight hit them just right, I realized some of those faces were familiar. Men who'd vanished on this rig years ago. One of them even looked like Daniels. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. The water rippled as the shapes drifted downward, fading into the blue, leaving only silence. The horn never sounded again that day, but last night, just before midnight, I woke to the sound of it moaning once. Then again, my pulse thrashed in my throat as I waited for the third call, and when it came, my door rattled on its hinges, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. I don't know how long sunrise will protect us, but I know this. The horn doesn't just warn ships, it warns us. The sea is patient, and when it sings through steel, it wants more than wrecks. It wants us, and it will never stop calling. The night after the foghorn incident, the air around the platform felt heavier, as if every gust of wind carried something more than just salt and cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that the platform itself was alive, each bolt and beam vibrating with a strange tension that seeped into my bones. Sleep had become almost impossible, and even when I managed to close my eyes, I would hear the distant echoes of voices below the steel deck, calling faintly like they were trapped in the waves. I told myself it was just the sea playing tricks, but the way Lars refused to meet my eyes made me think he had been hearing them too. The emergency ladders were bolted to each side of the platform, long rusted things that stretched down into the black water like veins connecting us to something far older than the steel they clung to. During the day they looked harmless, just another safety measure in case we needed to reach the boats tied to the base. But at night they were something else entirely. The floodlights barely touched them, leaving most of the rungs swallowed in shadow, and when the wind carried just right, I could swear I heard someone climbing, the steady clink of boots against steel. That was when I remembered the entry in the old notebook, the one written in a hand that shook even in the ink. Rule 9, never climb the emergency ladders after midnight, no matter what you hear below. The first time I felt the pull to disobey it was just after 2 in the morning. A sound rose up through the storm, a low wailing like a woman screaming into the wind, and it carried from directly beneath the platform. My instinct screamed at me to look, to lean over the rail and see if someone had fallen, if one of the crew was calling for help, but my hands froze against the steel. The sea below was pitch black, broken only by the violent spray of waves hammering the supports. And even if someone had been there, there was no way they could survive those waters. Still, the voice rose, cracking into sobs that twisted my stomach, and with each cry I felt my feet inch closer to the ladder. By the time I reached the edge, Lars was already there, his face pale in the floodlight. He didn't say anything at first, just gripped my arm hard enough to hurt, but then he leaned close, his breath reeking of stale coffee. "Don't look down," he whispered, his voice so tight it barely carried over the storm. "That's not for us." When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head, staring into the dark like he expected something to crawl up from it. Later, when we were both sitting in the mess hall pretending to eat, he finally muttered that he had seen a face once, pale and slick with seawater, looking up at him from the bottom rung. He never told me whose face it was, and I never pressed, but I could tell from the way his hand trembled on the table that it hadn't been a stranger. The cries kept coming night after night, always after midnight, always from below, and the worst part was how familiar they began to sound. At first it was just a woman, indistinct and strange, but soon I started hearing my brother's voice, shouting my name the way he used to when we were kids playing by the shore. Another night it was my mother, her tone sharp and commanding, telling me to come down, telling me she was waiting. The sea was pulling at the deepest parts of me, digging through memory and grief, and I understood then why the rule existed. The ladders weren't escape routes, they were invitations, the kind you didn't come back from. One evening, after a particularly brutal storm, we found one of the ladders slick with fresh seawater, the rungs wet as though someone had just climbed them. But none of us had gone out there, and the gate to the deck had been locked from the inside the whole night. Lars refused to touch it, muttering under his breath as he walked away. But I stayed, staring at the trail of water that led across the deck and then simply vanished at the midpoint. I wanted to convince myself it was rain, that the wind had driven the spray high enough to soak the ladder, but deep down I knew better. Someone or something had been up here. The breaking point came when Jansen, one of the newer crew, laughed off the warnings. He was young, cocky, the kind who thought rules were just stories meant to keep the weak in line. That night, just past 1, we heard the cries again, this time sharper, desperate, calling his name directly. Before any of us could stop him, he was at the ladder, gripping the side rails with both hands, his grin flashing white in the floodlight. "Sounds like someone needs help," he shouted over the wind, but none of us dared move closer. I watched, frozen, as he put one boot on the first rung, then the second, his head craning downward into the dark. The moment his foot touched the third rung, the cries stopped. Dead silence swallowed the platform, the wind itself cutting off like the sea was holding its breath. Jansen froze, half crouched against the ladder, and for a second I thought maybe he realized the mistake. But then he looked back up at us, and his face wasn't his own anymore. His eyes were wide, yes, but not with fear. Something else was staring out from behind them, something that made my skin crawl. Then he let go, not a fall, not a slip. He let go, his body vanishing into the black water below without so much as a splash. We searched for him at first light, circling the base with ropes and lights, but there was nothing, not even debris. The sea had taken him, or perhaps he had simply joined whatever was waiting down there. The rest of the crew didn't speak of it, didn't even write it down in the log, but I couldn't shake the way his face had changed in that final moment. It hadn't looked scared, it had looked hungry. That was when I understood that the ladders weren't just paths down into the sea, they were doors, and whatever was below wanted them open. Now every time the cries come, I force myself to stay in my bunk, gripping the sides until my knuckles ache. I know if I step foot outside, I won't be able to resist the pull, won't be able to stop myself from reaching the rungs. And the worst part is that the voices are getting clearer, sharper, like they know exactly which ones will break me. Last night, I heard my own voice calling from below, begging for someone to come down. If that's what the sea can do, if it can wear our faces and steal our sounds, then the rule isn't just about survival, It's about keeping the platform from being swallowed whole, and I don't know how much longer we can hold out." After Jansen vanished into the black water, silence became heavier than the storms themselves. The crew walked like ghosts, each of us carrying the weight of knowing the sea was listening, always listening. But the silence didn't last long. 2 nights later, it was broken by the sound of a door slamming somewhere below, a hollow metallic thud that rattled the whole rig. At first I thought it was just the wind, but the way Lars paled, muttering under his breath, told me otherwise. He didn't need to say it out loud. The doors below us weren't supposed to move after dark. The lower deck stretched just above the waterline, a series of narrow walkways and rusted doors leading into storage rooms no one really used anymore. They were forgotten places, out of sight, out of mind, until night came. Then they became something else. The logbook had been clear. Rule 10, keep every door on the lower deck locked after sundown. If one is open, don't shut it yourself. Wait, at the time I first read it, I thought it was paranoia, maybe an old safety habit from a crew that feared intruders or smugglers. But the longer I stayed here, the more the rule felt like a wall standing between us and something that didn't belong above the waves. That first night the slam echoed again, and this time it was followed by a steady creak, like a hinge swaying back and forth. I went to the railing and looked down, but the floodlights couldn't pierce the shadows below. I caught only glimpses of rusted steel and black water shifting together, almost as if the sea itself was brushing up against the platform with intent. Lars grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back before I leaned too far. His voice was tight, almost panicked. "Don't look for it. That's how it notices you." His words weren't a warning, they were a confession. Later, when we were huddled in the mess hall, trying to pretend the sound wasn't echoing through the beams, one of the engineers, Dale, snapped. He slammed his fork down, swearing about superstition and fear. "It's just a damn door," he barked. "A rusty hinge, nothing more. We can't keep living like prisoners." Before anyone could stop him, he marched toward the deck. I wanted to follow, to drag him back, but Lars grabbed my wrist and shook his head with such force that I froze. "If he touches it," he whispered, "he's already gone." From the windows we saw Dale descend the grated stairs. The floodlight caught him for a moment, his body outlined against the endless dark, before he disappeared into the lower deck shadows. We heard his boots ringing against the metal walkway. Then silence. For nearly 5 minutes, nothing happened. I almost believed he had proved the rule wrong, until we heard him scream. It wasn't a normal scream, not even a scream of pain. It was the sound of someone being dragged underwater in a single breath, cut off so fast it didn't sound human. Then came the wet slam of the door shutting itself. When we searched at dawn, Dale was gone. The door he had gone to close was sealed tight, rusted over like it hadn't moved in years. That night changed everything. The sound of slamming doors became regular, sometimes once a week, sometimes every night. They never followed a pattern, but always after sundown. The worst part wasn't the noise, it was the waiting. We'd sit there, holding our breath, listening for which door it would be, praying it wasn't beneath our quarters. More than once I heard footsteps pacing on the lower deck after the slam, slow and deliberate, like something was trying to remember how to walk. No one dared go down to look, not anymore. The fear grew worse when the doors started opening on their own. We'd wake to find one swinging wide in the morning light, its interior dry, empty, as if nothing had touched it for months. But the smell of seawater and rot, hung in the air like a wound. One morning, I found deep wet footprints leading from an open door across the steel, and then stopping abruptly in the middle of the deck, as if whoever or whatever left them simply vanished. Lars burned the logbook entry that night, swearing under his breath, but burning words doesn't erase the thing that wrote them. I began to wonder why the rule was so specific, why we weren't supposed to close the doors ourselves. That question gnawed at me until the answer came one night, unasked. I woke to the sound of a door creaking just below my bunk. Against every instinct, I crept down to the observation window and looked. In the dim light, I saw the lower deck door hanging open, the shadows inside rippling like water, though no tide could reach that high. And there, standing just in the frame, was a figure. Not a stranger. It was Dale. His skin was gray, sagging, his hair wet and matted to his face, but his eyes locked on mine with unnatural sharpness. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there with the door yawning behind him. For hours, I couldn't tear myself from the window. It felt like if I blinked, he would climb the ladder, that he would bring whatever was behind that door with him. But just before dawn, the door shut on its own. When I ran down to check, there was nothing. Just rust, locked hinges, and silence. I didn't tell the others what I saw, but I knew then why the rule existed. The doors weren't just openings in steel. They were invitations, and if you tried to close them, you were accepting. The sea wanted us to reach out. The sea wanted our hands on the handle. Now, every night, when the doors slam, I sit perfectly still, staring at the ceiling until morning. Sometimes I hear whispers beneath the creaks, voices curling up through the steel floor. Sometimes they're begging me to open the door, sometimes commanding it, but the rule keeps me alive. The doors will open and shut on their own, and as long as I never touch them, I remain on this side of the water. But deep down, I know it's only a matter of time before one stays open long enough that waiting won't save us. The first time I heard it, I thought exhaustion was playing tricks on me. The night was calm, the waves lapping softly against the steel legs of the rig, and the wind had died enough that you could hear everything. The creak of chains, the rattle of loose bolts, even the hum of the generators inside. That's when it came. My name, whispered, almost tender, rising from the black water below like it was caught in the foam. I froze, my breath snagging in my throat. The sound didn't echo like a normal voice. It carried upward, as if the sea itself had formed lips just long enough to speak. At first, I wanted to believe it was one of the crew messing with me. Loneliness makes men cruel out here, and the ocean drives them to strange games. But the voice wasn't Lars, or Miller, or anyone else still living. It was softer, familiar. It was my sister's voice. She's been dead for 6 years. I felt the blood drain from my face as it repeated my name, louder this time, like she was just beneath the platform, waiting for me to lean over. Rule 11. If you hear someone calling your name from the water after midnight, do not answer. It is never who you think it is. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a coil of rope, and bolted to the mess hall, where a few of the others were still awake. My chest was heaving, and I must have looked half mad, because Lars stood up immediately and grabbed me by the shoulders. I told them what I'd heard, every detail, down to the way the voice had curved into the syllables of my name, like only she used to say it. When I finished, Miller, one of the oldest crewmen, face creased like salt-stained leather, just muttered, "It's starting for you then." He poured me a drink, something bitter and burning, and told me to sit down before my legs gave out. He explained in that slow, rasping tone of his that every man who stayed here long enough heard it eventually. The ocean learned their names. It learned their memories, their grief, their most private losses, and it weaponized them. It never shouted, never demanded. It lured, a voice from the water, soft as a prayer, promising you that someone you loved was waiting in the deep. That's why the rule existed, he said. Because the moment you answered, the moment you acknowledged the voice as real, it came for you. I asked him if anyone had ever broken the rule, and the way he looked at me was answer enough. His eyes went distant, hollow, fixed on something far older than the rest of us. Later, Lars filled in the details. There was a crewman named Harris years back. His wife had drowned off the coast of Cornwall, and when he heard her calling, he answered without hesitation. The others found him leaning over the railing, speaking softly into the dark like he was in conversation. They tried to drag him back, but his body was rigid, his eyes locked on the waves below. Then, without warning, he smiled, an awful, peaceful smile, and threw himself in. His body was never found, only his voice lingered, calling back from the water the next night. After that story, I didn't sleep for 2 days. I tried plugging my ears with wax, but the sound bled through, muffled but persistent, like the ocean had learned how to bypass silence itself. Sometimes the voices changed. One night it was my sister again. The next it was my father, who I hadn't spoken to in years before his heart gave out. The voice knew exactly how to twist the knife. Apologies I never heard, forgiveness I never gave, all dangled beneath me like baited hooks. There were times I almost broke, times when the loneliness carved me open so wide, I found myself leaning over the railing, lips parting before I caught myself, and staggered back. The worst night came last week. The storm had been raging for hours, waves battering the rig so violently, it felt like the whole structure might snap. Most of the crew had retreated inside, but I was stuck on watch duty, clinging to the rail, while rain lashed my face. That's when I heard it again, my name, but not from below. This time it came from every direction at once, carried on the storm like a chorus. Dozens of voices, all speaking at once, all people I knew, my mother, old friends, even Dale, the one we lost to the lower deck doors. They begged me to come down, told me they were waiting, that they weren't gone but living below the waves in a place of light and calm. I almost answered, I swear I almost did. My throat burned with the weight of the words, but then I remembered Miller's face, the emptiness in his eyes when he spoke about the sea's tricks. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands over my mouth until the storm passed and the voices faded. But the memory hasn't left me. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them again, coaxing, cajoling, promising me that all I have to do is say one word, just one, and I'll never be alone again. Now I've started noticing something worse. The voices are no longer waiting until midnight. The last few nights, they've crept closer to dusk, catching me off guard when I least expect it. Yesterday, I heard my sister's voice in broad daylight, rising faintly over the crash of the waves as I checked the generators. The rule says after midnight, but what happens if the boundary shifts? What happens if the sea grows impatient? Every man on this rig is breaking in slow motion, chipped away one voice at a time. None of us speak about it openly anymore, but I see it in their eyes, the longing, the exhaustion, the terrible temptation to finally answer. I don't know how long I can resist. And when I finally do break, when I finally whisper back into the black water, I wonder what will answer me in return.